Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Words on Whiskey, a special edition we have today, and we're here to celebrate the life of Master Cooper John Neely, who, of course, spent a considerable amount of time in Kilbeggan, and before working then at the Nephin cooperage, both in Kilbeggan, well, mostly in Kilbeggan actually. So, and he took on two apprentices there, Darren and Ian. So, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I'll bring in our guests now, and our guests are Mark Quick and Dr. John Teeling. John, good evening. How are you?
How are you? I better get the hair right.
Well, you're making me wear an awful lot of ties.
Quite right. Yeah. It's all right from the west of Ireland. They don't have to wear things out there.
No,
I didn't know that we should be in the collars and ties tonight.
No.
If you ever see me without a collar and tie, there's something wrong.
Yeah, I'll be concerned if you're not, John. So I hope you're both keeping well anyway. How are you both keeping with everything going on?
I'm trying to get the tie right. Yeah.
Yeah. Reverse angle on the camera, John.
Yes, it's all right. I got it.
Yeah. Listen, all good here. And look, I'm delighted that we're able to celebrate the love of John. I can't say I knew him personally very well. I only met the gentleman once. And by fluke. So I just happened to be in the Kilbeggan Distillery and went for a stroll, and I hear this banging and water draining down a laneway around the corner, and it happened to be the guys working in the cooperage next to this Quick Fit gym. So we kind of chanced my arm and went in, and he was very welcoming. We took a few photos, and Darren and Ian and John were all very hospitable, so I have very fond memories, and of course everything was done by hand. So I'm glad I have that fond memory. And then, of course, sadly, that the time I did plan to go down, I went down unannounced again, and sadly heard the news that he had passed away in just before Christmas there, 2018. So maybe, Mark, you might just like to tell us a little bit about how you got to know John and how he got to work for Nephin, but perhaps maybe it actually makes more sense to start with John. John, you're the man responsible for bringing him over.
Yes, himself and another Scotsman, Brian Baker, who came from the Gorbals. When we bought Kilbeggan, we needed a cooper because we weren't buying selects, we were buying kind of used barrels, and there was some repairs, and there was nobody. Irish distillers didn't help us, and the few coopers that were available weren't as efficient in terms of experience. John and Brian could do 19 barrels a day, whereas the Irish ones are doing 11. So we brought the two over from Scotland, and I think both of them thought they had died and gone to heaven, because they were coming from inner city Glasgow, in built-up area. And suddenly they have the houses in Kilbeggan with gardens and detached. I know that John's wife and kids really enjoyed it. And they settled in extremely well. I certainly know John took to the Irish life like a duck to water. Now, maybe he knew about it already, but he really enjoyed life. And he was very good for us. They as you say, when we had Kilbeggan itself, this was 1990, remember. When we had Kilbeggan, he worked as part of the tour, had a little cooperage in Kilbeggan itself, in Locks. And he worked there, and it was a great attraction to people, probably more than the actual whiskey itself. The art of making a barrel or repairing a barrel seems to evoke something in people. But he was very good, very successful, very well liked in Kilbeggan, and his wife and family. So it was a very successful meeting all around. Now, he was very much his own man, as I'm sure Mark will tell you. John did what John wanted to do. Now, he was minded in Kilbeggan by Brian Quinn, whom I don't know, he may be on this. Brian Quinn, who was the general manager in Kilbeggan until we actually sold it in 2011. And Brian protected John against his own worst inclinations and looked after him very well. So I spoke to Brian today to tell him what we were going to do. But it was a very good experience for us. He brought a lot of skills, as you say. He took on apprentices, but he was just a very unusual, not unusual, I suppose it was unusual for us because there weren't many coopers around. But it was a successful experience.
Yeah. And Mark, maybe you could tell us how John started his career, where he was born, and where he grew up? You might know better.
Yeah, well, I know that his great-great-grandfather was a Donegal man. Of course, that'd be common enough for half of Glasgow. But John started his apprenticeship in a little place called Port Dundas in Glasgow, Harvey's cooperage, where his dad worked. So John went in with his dad at 15 years of age. And from age 15 to age 66, never did anything else in his life but dedicate those 50 odd years to just practicing his craft.
So, I got the impression he didn't take to mechanization and automation very well. Everything was hand done with John.
It was, yeah. I think he'd have chanced the mechanization. All right, but most of he was a journeyman cooper, as they called him in Scotland, for a good while. So we say he'd have his bag of tools with him, and he'd be going around to the different distilleries. So I suppose that certainly didn't suit the mechanization, but he was very forward, sort of thinking in his work as well. So there was a balance between, keeping that craft, and being that kind of a Luddite about it either,
Yeah. But I mean, it's an art form that's all but disappeared in the sense of, from scratch. And he showed me some of the casks he had made. Some of them were tiny, some of them were huge, and then using reeds and so forth. It was all really, really interesting.
And I think that's the beauty of, what John was doing, because he had that, craft that stretched all the way back from his father's time and hadn't changed, is that, and he passed it on to the next generation, of course, as well. The great thing about that is that he can turn his hand to anything. So it's not that he's trained in a specific machined element of cooperage. It's really the whole craft. So if one day you're making an octave, from cutting up a different barrel and making an octave, you could be making a brand new oak barrel from scratch, or you could be, repairing a huge port pipe. Just the ability to turn your hand to whatever is required by the whiskey. I think that's the great kind of beauty of knowing everything from scratch.
Yeah, look, I'm delighted to see some people that obviously would have known John very well. So I see Ian and Darren Leonard, of course, who served their apprenticeship under John, and two fabulous guys. It's great to see that they are keeping the tradition alive. And Jack O'Shea, of course. Jack, welcome. Jack would have known John, I'm sure. So if anybody has any nice stories they'd like to share with us, or any questions they want to put to Mark or John, that would be a really nice touch, I think. But I just want to share some photos, perhaps, of John, and let's see how we do this. So, okay, so obviously these are, you might talk us through these, Mark.
Yeah, these are all photos we took because with the product we launched, with John, and then the commemorative edition that we did, which sadly we didn't intend to do that one. All of the imagery that we're using is just actual photos, photography that we did ourselves with John, and so very distinctly John's hands with all of the war marks from down through the years. It's a tough trade, of course, as well. Yeah, and that's what I loved about that sort of photo. But
that's his father's tools, or?
Yeah, the hammer certainly. Yeah, the hammer that he used right up to 2018 was his father's hammer, and you could very much tell that in person, because the grip was worn down to nearly a matchstick, with people grabbing it over the years. So it was a lovely sculpted kind of handheld hammer, and a lot of history, of course, in that hammer, living history.
Yeah. And obviously there's the hands that have certainly worked. They haven't spent a day in an office, I don't think.
No. And I think, like one of the lovely things about this was that, it was very real. So it wasn't it wasn't kind of a story about something that we were detached from. And I suppose that's why we're so sort of into the product, is that, this was a living kind of working real sort of operation, and there's John with the two lads. That's the good looking one there is Darren.
Oh. And Darren on the left and Ian on the right, is it? Or I best not say. These are lovely photographs to have. And
they're Darren and Ian. When we started with John, we said, look, we're going to, we started in a blank shed, and we had John's set of tools, of course, and 2 barrels in the place. But we said, we're going to send you these lads from Mayo. And so Darren and then his brother Ian would drive from Mayo every morning down to Kilbeggan, do their day's training with John, and drive back, 5 days a week.
Yeah,
so
it's a big commitment. And certainly speaking to
they'd work hard during the time they were down there.
I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. And here we see John working with Reed, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's lovely. It would have been the same, that's would have been the same in the Kilbeggan days as well,
Exactly.
The use of reed for around the head and the stave joints, which is a kind of an Irish Scottish tradition, rather than using some putties or waxes or sealants.
John, up until what point was John working with you?
He worked with us from 1990 till 2011. I was visiting Mark. I actually thought he was younger, so maybe he I thought he was only 61 when he died, so he was obviously much younger when he came to us. So he came to us and was still there when Cooley was sold to Jim Beam.
Oh,
and your 2 colleagues there, the 2 Lennons who were working, the facility certainly in Locks were really cold and damp, because it was a very old, damp, it was 18th century kind of a warehouse that he was working in with a clay floor. So he hadn't got the best of it, but there was one very interesting. So he was with us right from the beginning of the Renaissance, all the way through, and had all of the problems. Himself and Brian stayed with us in 94, and we were in trouble in 94. We lost about 2 years production. Yes. And Brian moved on, and he's still living in Kilbeggan, has a good job. And John stayed with us. So, not knowing whether or not it would get started again. And we didn't either, for that matter. But so he was very much with us. An interesting story. I don't know whether your 2 colleagues there, Mark and Bob. I was down there one particular day, not knowing very much about anything, and I couldn't find John. And he was there was a small room to the back of the cooperage. And what he was doing in there was, he had, I don't know, maybe a couple of pints or half a gallon of water in a bourbon cask, and he was heating it. He was heating the bourbon cask. I hadn't a clue what he was doing, naturally, with my great level of skill, I didn't know what he was doing. And what he was doing, of course, was when he heated up quite a lot, the steam, and so the bourbon in the wood started to come out. And so he ended up with, something to keep him warm for a while. I don't know how much he got out of individual casks, but probably quite a bit.
He wasn't bottling it on the side, no?
Oh, no, I didn't know anything. As I said, he was well protected by Brian Quinn, who I think knew that, look, we didn't mind what he did. As long as he did his work, it was fine for us. And it was fine given that the amount of barrels, the amount of production we had in Kilbeggan. So he was only repairing barrels. We brought the barrels in from Kentucky, so he could handle that. Whereas the stage the industry is at now, I don't know what you're going to do. But I mean, Great Northern uses 90,000 barrels a year. And no matter how good John was, I think he'd struggle with that. I think you would have struggled with 9,000. Never mind 90,000.
You need 100 Johns. Yeah.
Remarkably, not remarkably, but for a man from Edinburgh or from Glasgow, who I don't think had ever been in a rural area, the people of Kilbeggan took him to heart, and he them. And to this day, I believe his two of his children, I don't know them. He would have been a grandfather now, so the children are married and I think living in the area. So it's been one of these great success stories of bringing them in, but very much a character. So I don't know if that adds anything to it, but I thought he was younger.
Yeah, I'll tell you from the early days now, when John was telling me over in Port Dundas, in Harvey's cooperage, when you went in the morning at 7:45 and you were starting work, they had a hatch on site, and they'd pull up the hatch, and everybody who's working there would line up, and they'd have their morning dram. So somebody had come along and they'd go to the hatch. The guy behind the hatch would pour them a dram, now free pouring, no measures or anything. And so you'd have your dram to warm up in the morning and you'd get to work. But they did it because, of course, nobody was late for work ever. They had no problem with attendance. But John used to tell us when he was young, the trick they'd have, you see, is that he'd be the first in, and he'd be at the top of the queue at the hatch, so you'd get your morning dram. But there was another hatch at the other side of the site. So if you were first in the queue for that hatch, you could run if you were quick, and you'd be last in the queue at the other hatch. So you'd actually get your 2 morning drams before you started work at all.
You see, that's how he could do so many casks a day.
Different world. Can you imagine in any of the operations we have now? Nothing like that. I mean, it was true of Guinness. It was true of Jameson. I think they got more than 2. And you can't do anything like that at all anymore now in the new politically correct and health and safety world.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I liked about the cooperage, particularly in Kilbeggan. It was just so rustic. I don't know what food and safety and health legislation might have said, but
Neither do I have to tell you. Neither do I. We're not at all sure. People were pretty good, and the people in the kind of the officials in Tullamore, and that would look after us, and they knew that we were doing our best, so they helped us along. But certainly it wouldn't be past modern health and safety, I don't think now. I don't know what you're doing up in Nephin. I haven't seen it, and I apologize for that. But this was terrible. It was a 200-year-old granite building.
Yeah.
Freezing cold, even in the middle of summer. So he needed a couple of drams.
And tell me, was that on the Kilbeggan cooperage? Was it on the same site as the current Kilbeggan Distillery now?
The original one was when you went down through the courtyard, which was the original 1757 courtyard. In front of you, you saw the lock sign.
Yeah.
As you went down to the left is where the cooperage was. It's now, I think they've turned it into a tasting centre or a visitor centre, and it's gone completely. But that's where it was, and that's where he worked the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. I mean, it's such a dedication to an art form. 50 years. It doesn't happen very much these days that, somebody would be in the same trade for 5 years, never mind 50 years. So, listen, I know that you launched this whiskey, a commemorative Cooper edition, a 12-year-old, with a very large, about 50% of the proceeds going to John's wife, Liz, which I think is a lovely touch. And what we'll do also on our side is anybody that purchases a subscription, all the proceeds will go to that cause as well. So any sales or any subscriptions within the next day and tomorrow, we'll be happy to contribute to that, Mark, just, as a bit of a commemoration for the great work that he's done. It's a service he's done to the whole sector. It's not just a service to one particular brand. And I think, Ian and Darren have had great training and picked up a great responsibility in a sense as well.
Yeah, it is. It's a whole industry thing, really, because of course John started with John down in Kilbeggan, and I would presume would have had an influence on Cooley down through the years. And so, with the work we were doing, because of course our distillery wasn't built at all, when John started. So the idea was he'd train the next generation, and at the same time we'd take on, work for all the other distillers who wanted us to do work for them around the country. So, and to this day, Darren and Ian, of course, interact with lots of all of the distilleries more or less around the country, so that wouldn't have happened, obviously, if that link had been broken in the chain. Sure. And John didn't pass on those skills to the next generation. I don't know where they'd be right now.
Yeah. No, it's right.
But they wouldn't be Coopers, Would
you like to have appointed? They have actually grown some Coopers now, as you may have noticed in the last couple of years. And again, it makes complete sense in this country, because one of the great benefits we have over Scotland is that we must mature in a wooden cask, and we are far more flexible in the type of wood that we use. And I think that means that all 38 or 40 distilleries, they all are not going to, and certainly shouldn't, just make a standard Irish product. There's going to have to be differentiation, and a huge amount of that will come from the wood.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
So for the two boys there, the two men that studied with John, the opportunity is great. I think it's a hard job, but certainly I think in the coming years, it's up to us in the Irish Whiskey Association to make absolutely sure that they don't try and restrict the innovation. Yeah. I see. That's Lisa Maloney has come in. Lisa,
welcome, Lisa.
I know your married name, and you're only a little girl when I knew you. Very much a little girl in the Mercy College. No, is it the Mercy College? I think our Sisters of Charity in Kilbeggan. But I think it's very, very important. That's why I'm happy to be here. That we innovate, and wood is a major source. And I know Jack O'Shea, if he's here, knows the exact same thing here. It is a major source of innovation for us.
Yeah, and Jack has John who worked for Altec in Cardiff for a while as well.
He did. I remember him. They were kind of the years in between, I suppose. And I'd have been in contact with John, and he was doing a lot of work. Of course, Jack was distilling down in Carlow at the time, which subsequently, turned into Pierce Lyons up in Dublin. But John was doing plenty of work for them through the years, and so that's what I mean, is that it was a huge amount of the industry actually. If we ever sat down and ticked off all of the jobs we did around the country, John would have been involved with touching a huge amount of wood.
A central part, definitely. There's no doubt about it. That we in Cooley didn't have full-time work all the time, because particularly in the early years before 2000, and he managed to survive and get work elsewhere and do it. He was certainly very good on that.
Yeah. I mean, he would have been of the lines of working. Well, he would have known Ger Buckley, of course, and the Coopers up north. What did he make of the growth and the expansion of Irish whiskey? And certainly today, what would he have thought of the development?
I don't know who to answer that. It's a fabulous story, and whether we had much to do with it, or whether it's a changing taste that young people like the taste of Irish whiskey, we'd like to think we had some. He was central to it. He was part of a tiny bunch. There were only 5 or 6 of us. And I say Lisa there would know how Brian Quinn and Bernadette Quinn in Kilbeggan, and then David Hines and Noel Sweeney and a couple of guys in Cooley. I mean, that really was it, because there was Irish distillers and nothing else.
Yes.
And he was there, and he had to know. He took a big risk in coming to a small startup with people who didn't know their ass from their elbow in whiskey. Probably still don't. But they know how to make good whiskey. And he has a right to be known as somebody who was there putting down the building blocks that led to the creation of it. Yes, there isn't the slightest doubt about that.
Yeah, I certainly think a lot of the legacy will certainly be, the skills that he's passed on, of course, to Darren and Ian. But John, just a quick question then about coopering as it is today. I mean, you mentioned your 90,000 casks. How do you deal with repairing casks and so forth now? Do you just disband them, or do you actually fix them?
It's a pain in the neck, and I think Mark knows that. Mark has been up in Dundalk talking to us about it.
Darren and Ian would do a few of those?
Well, they would certainly. What we try and do now, and we're fairly strict on it, though we're not succeeding all that well, is we try and buy selects. In other words, rather than run of distillery run. And you look for maybe damage or leakers of maybe 2%. Now, when you start to use next use, in other words, second use casks, or recharged casks, then your leakers are much more. Now, I am blessed with the workforce in the Great Northern, because there are guys there who can repair. Now, I don't think that is, and Mark knows we've talked, I don't think that's a good use of their time, because they're a very good workforce for casking and then for disgorging and blending, just mixing. So it's something we will have to look at, because even 2% of 90,000 is 1,800 casks.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yes, it is. And I mean, if you go now past on the train going past, you'll see mounds of casks all over. Thank God. Actually, one of the problems with a big site is there's plenty of place to hide them. But we have a lot of casks on site.
Yeah.
Mark, just finished a week of hard labor getting through those repairs, and I actually mentioned to Darren that we might need him for a day over the Christmas break, but of course he's getting married on the 29th, Darren. So I thought we definitely won't get him in before the 30th anyway to start again.
Yeah. I mean, what would he want to? Yeah, give him the 29th off. That should be enough. They're flat out all the time repairing. Yeah, well, it has to grow. There's no doubt it has to grow. Are you going to have specialist guys for repairing and things like that? Because we're not the only one using casks. I don't know how many casks Irish distillers use. 6? Now, they'd have a lot of second and third use casks, which, of course, will need more repairs. Yeah. So there's going to be a big growing need for specialist coopers.
Yeah. It was great foresight of the team in Nephin to actually set up the cooperage. I think that's a fantastic idea. It's like the gold rush. The people that made the money were the guys selling the shovels.
Yeah. So, John mentioned just there that John Niley took a huge risk joining them in 1990. He seems to have continued that trend because joining with us as well in 2014. Because we were sitting down with John, and I was telling him about the plans we had for our peated single malt, and how we were going to use unusual casks, and we'd like to make some of these casks, and like this product that we're launching now in commemoration of John. It's matured in octaves, which is a 63 litre cask, that John made every one of these. And so we wanted to do stuff like that. But of course, I was talking to him, about these plans. And of course, we hadn't sod turned on a distillery at this stage, not to mind a distillery completed. Yeah. So he took another sort of risk, and we said, look, we haven't the distillery started yet, but what we'll do is in the interim, we'll, if you'll found the Nephin cooperage, we'll locate it in Kilbeggan for the time being. We'll send the guys to you. We'll take on the work, and then we'll get the distillery built over the years. And so of course at this stage, we had even up to 2018, we were making very long-term plans with John. So even in 2018, we produced the first product of the Cooper, which was...
You showed me a bottle of that earlier. You showed me that earlier. So maybe you want to tell us how this particular release came about, and a little bit about the cause.
One of the original bottles here now. This was a 10-year-old, and it was a single malt from the north of the Highlands in Scotland, and we put it into limousine oak octaves that John and the two lads made down in Kilbeggan. So we were making the casks, the octaves, and we were sending them over to Scotland to get filled with this malt, and then we'd leave it for a finish. And we bottled that then for the US market at 750 mils. Yeah. And so we had done that, and John was over. We delivered the octave casks over to Scotland, and myself and John were on a good trip over there to see them fill, just check them, make sure everything worked out well. And so, of course, then it got bottled after the finish, and John got the first bottle in his hand. I remember delivering it to him. Well, and it wasn't on sale yet at this stage, But so you live to see that project come to fruition. It has his insignia on it. It has his signature on it. And so we're bringing that. We had great plans. So long-term plans, of course. The first release was the US, but we had made 5 other octaves then from different wood types, and we were really researching at this stage, for what we do in future. And so we sent those 5 octaves to Scotland to get filled with the same 10-year-old malt, made from American oak, a French oak out of a port pipe, a Premier Cru Sauterne, an Amarone barrel, and a Barbados rum. So in making those octaves, we'd take those big barrels, like the ports were 500, most of the others would be 200, 225. And John and the guys would take them apart, cut them all down, shave the sides of the staves to fit back into a smaller formation, make new heads, make new crows. The ends had to be redone, all sealed up again. The hoops, we'd recycle everything. So we'd take the big hoops and we'd cut them up, and then we'd rivet smaller hoops to suit the new casks. And so there's a lot of work involved in making those octaves, And so we sent those 5 to Scotland. They got filled, but obviously hugely unplanned. They ended up being the last 5 octaves that John ever made. Yeah. So we knew that they existed, obviously at the time it was the last thing on our mind, really. And we subsequently dealt with John's loss, and because obviously John was a friend of all of ours as well as a colleague at this stage. So we moved the cooperage back up to, or not back up, but we moved it up to Mayo because it didn't make sense to have the guys traveling so much. And the reason it was in Kilbeggan was John. And so it was a couple of years later, really, by the time we ended up kind of having the time to consider that those 5 octaves existed in Scotland, and they were the last 5s that John made. So that's how the idea came about. We sampled some of them and vatted them together to see, it was amazing.
And this is the result here, is it?
The result, yeah.
So look, tell us a little bit about it then, please, if you wouldn't mind, Mark.
You can see, actually, we have a lovely comparison of the difference. This was the original 10-year-old that has a year in Limousine oak. And then this is the 12-year-old version here then with the different octaves. So I don't know if you can see well.
Yeah, a lot darker, a lot darker.
The color difference in that space of time. Now, they're octave casks, so you're going to have quite an impact from the cask.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be lovely. A really creamy, buttery component.
I have it here in front of me, so I'll have a drink and a toast to John.
I have it here, but as you know, I would not with it. But if I could just say, Mark, it was great listening to you because I know Jack knows this of me. I really do believe that the variations in wood that you're doing are going to be very important for us. It's extremely important in this industry of ours, which is dominated, well dominated by one company, that we have points of differences and high quality points of difference. And that's a lot of that is going to happen in the wood for the next few years, I think, and we must make sure to protect that. Now, you do say, listening to you, I was getting tired listening to you about the amount of work that has to be put into them. So it's going to be premium, super premium, or ultra premium prices. And that's all you can do. So, I mean, to put a 3-year-old, maybe you can put a 3-year-old blend into it and like Chivas without an age, and sell it on the finish. which, as you know, we're trying a bit in Dundalk. And but for all of the smaller distilleries, or even for us when we have different customers, I think the availability of different woods is extremely important for the future of our industry. Very, very important.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the key distinguishing features.
And the Scots are years and years behind us, and long may they stay that way.
Bit of healthy competition, John never did
anymore. No. Fair tell.
John never had any. There was no sign of John retiring, was there, Mark?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I mean, I think he retired maybe two in between before he started with us, but it just didn't suit him really. I remember a great quote from him, and we've used it directly since. He said, "This is what I was made for."
Right.
It was, that was John to a T. Really, yeah. I absolutely think he would, have been Cooper, and not as maybe now as, because it is, John said earlier, it's hard work, and
I mean, what's this ageism? What's this? Jack, are you hearing this? Retirement for a guy. I think this is abuse of older people.
John,
had the remotest intention of retiring.
You might consider an apprenticeship with us yet in Mayo.
I might have to. But I tell you now, I mean, if Lisa's listening here, I'm sure her mother would have been delighted to have John at home all day, every day. I know she would.
That could be part of the reason that the retirement didn't suit.
I'm sure Deirdre's delighted to have you at home all the time, John, as well.
I'm telling you something, you've heard her say it.
Yes.
She intends that I work till I'm 95. She says, there's no way, out you go. And 95, she'll accept. Her father worked almost at that age, so she has a precedent.
Right.
Okay. If we're doing something we like, and John was, I mean, that was his craft, that was his art. What? And as long as you're able to, why would you want to now,
There, Lisa said it.
I like to hear that. Never retire. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is ageism, Sergius. I mean, wait a minute, another 20 years, you'll be in the same boat there now.
Stop, I'm waiting for my father's been retiring for the last 25 years, and he's never going to. But I just wanted to share a video actually here. I don't know if this will work. We'll have a go. At sharing this video. I just thought it was a nice video. We won't get the sound effects, I don't believe.
All right.
Oh, we might.
Here's John now putting that one of the octaves together.
Yeah. So the octave is what size? What's the capacity of an octave again?
The name octave comes from an eighth, but it's an eighth of European size 500. So it's an eighth of 500, about 63 liters.
Right.
Yeah. So here's the guys marking out the size of the head here now. Yeah. So he's marking out the size of the head so he can cut it in. There's Darren now at the draw knife making yeah.
Isn't it amazing how the cask in its nature has not changed?
No, I think it's amazing. I agree with you. Just looking at it, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Which is why these have got to be. I mean, Mark, they've got to be specialty products, segmented and premium and super premium, which they will be. I haven't the slightest doubt that they will be.
Absolutely.
Just on that, when we at one stage we were trying to be clever, we decided we would make quarter casks, which Lefroy were doing. And they had, and John had to make them for us exactly like that. We thought we'd get faster maturation with quarter casks. Yeah. And if you do go and see them, if they show them in Kilbeggan anymore, I don't know, I haven't been there. They were still maturing, some of them. It was an experiment that was worth doing and didn't work. But
right.
Maybe Lefroy with the peated, the heavily peated, impacted more on the wood. But we didn't see much difference after 4 or 5 years between the liquid coming out of a quarter cask and coming out of a standard bourbon cask.
Really, yeah. I would have expected it to, but
yeah, we thought now maybe we did something wrong.
You generally tend to get the impact faster, but it leaving out over time,
I think maybe that was it. Yeah, I thought they're beautiful little casks.
They are, and I suppose it depends on the wood you start with then as well. Like some of these, we'll say the Amarone wood that we were using in these, the impact is the color impact that you get is just so fast from the Amarone influence. So it depends a lot making. They were all limousine oak, so you see if you were watching the video, they're not charred inside. So it very much depends, on what type of wood you start with, of course, as well.
There's a nice quote there from Lisa. My gran called him a martyr for working so long, and he told her as long as he was able to work, he would work, as he loved it so much. He never considered it work, and he felt he found a home with Nephin. That's lovely.
That's nice.
Yeah. That's I suppose you find what you like to do, you're never going to consider it work. But it's lovely to see that trade. How many of these bottles are available, Mark? And you were
not many available, thank God. But there was 360 produced.
360 produced and €250.
Much. You see, because it wasn't planned at all, this wasn't planned. They ended up being the last 5 casks that John had made. So once we got around to them in 2020, they had become a 12-year-old. And then when we vatted them, we sampled them first to see if the vatting would work as together, if they'd marry the flavors. And so once they did, we wanted to, part as the symbolism of the last 5 octaves, but also we liked the symbolic 5 casks, one for each decade of John's craft. So when the whole thing hung together, that's how many bottles we ended up with. We ended up with 360 bottles. We bottled it at 46%, and so we ended up with 360, and we thought it'd be it's a lovely whiskey.
It is a lovely whiskey, and one of the things that I'm surprised about is how all the different wood finishes actually marry very well together. There's not one overpowering any of the others, which is very nice.
There's a lot of waves, like it's very creamy, sort of easy, whiskey. Really, a lot of nice creme brulee kind of notes, and then you get waves of the different. I'm not sure if you out the 5 individual ones, but certainly waves of different kind of wine influence.
I'd certainly get the rum and the Amarone. I'm pretty sure I get the Amarone notes off that. So there are still some bottles left. I think they're €250 and available in James Fox's.
Yeah, we teamed up with the guys at James Fox's because we work with them anyway, so we teamed up with those guys, and they just reopened the store, of course, which is lovely to be back open, on Grafton Street, but available also on, through the website, and they ship globally. So, they're great. They're great to cover all bases.
Yeah, and half the proceeds go towards John's wife, Liz, which is great. Very nice
we thought. Yeah, we thought, this was is about John commemorating, what he did in the industry, what he did with us at Nephin, and like his impact isn't finished, which is a really nice part, I think, about the story. It starts with John. It starts in Scotland, and then comes over to Ireland thanks to John Teeling, and, ends up being this history where it goes through to the next generation now with the Leonards, and probably onwards from there as well, But that's a really nice kind of continuum that we're on. So, as it was part of, celebrating John's life, we thought it was, quite appropriate.
Yeah, John, it must be really, really heartwarming and touching in a way to see, because of your efforts, John, that. John came over here, made such a big contribution to Irish whiskey, and has left a very strong legacy and dedicated his life to a craft that, all but lost essentially for a while. I mean, how do you reconcile that?
Thank you for doing it. I'm not so sure. Was it an accident or not that we set it up? No, I think all of you have heard me say many times there should always have been a very active, vibrant Irish whiskey industries. It's the logical place to make whiskey. And it was just a complete set of circumstances that had us being wiped out. And even with the current situation of 40, we're still only at about, 6% of Scotch sales. And I believe really strongly when we get over this year, which will take a couple of years, that we're going to go on and the industry is going to double again. So when people say, there are too many distilleries and they're all going to go bust, of course there'll be a shakeout in every industry. Yeah. But if you look at what you think is going to happen out there for the next 10 years, I think that there's a scarcity of capacity, would you believe?
Well, there'll certainly be a scarcity of Coopers anyway with the amount of...
I think it's a very interesting one as to where it goes, because I think you're going to see more and more in the more mature, as the markets mature, more and more specialism and segmentation. And young people want differentiation. And certainly the idea of marrying different types of barrels into one, which I don't think we've ever done ourselves, I think is a very interesting idea, because what they want is taste, different tastes, and they're quite happy to pay for it. So I think the future looks fabulous. And if it took a long time, remember, and that's why John was great to stick with us. We lost money for 11 years, which I wouldn't advise anybody listening to do. And I was carried by other ventures we were in and by long suffering shareholders. And then it picked up, and now we look very clever. We really didn't look clever until the early 2000s. And it looks, as you can imagine, I'm absolutely delighted by what's happening. And as I said to you, I think it is going to grow. We just got to make sure, and those of us who are around for the original technical file geographical indicator, that the big companies don't try and start to tighten it up as they did in Scotland to their detriment. And that'll be up to us all to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Actually, I got a call from a subscriber in Switzerland today, and they were telling me that, Scotland has gone and kind of more mundane in the sense, and Irish whiskey is what all the excitement is about. But he says, the Irish whiskey scene now is like the Scottish whiskey scene 30 years ago. So I suppose we don't want to make the same mistakes.
Right. Because that Scotch malts, because they have variations and some of them are very good, that's growing fast. But Scotch blend is actually declining and has over the last 15 years. And it's on a slow decline because they've the wrong product. They thought they were the masters. And as you say, mundane is a very good word for it. It's not bland, but it's not the taste that people want. It's not an exciting taste. And they're being surpassed by us, surpassed by Japanese, and the Indians are coming. Yes. And they've some very good whiskies, Taiwanese. So I think there's some signs, maybe Mark has seen, there are signs in Scotland that they're starting to relax the views on the type of woods you can use and when you can change it. But as I said again, I think what the reason I'm happy to do this, I think wood for the next 10 or 15 years is going to play an ever increasing role. We make the liquid and we can do the best we can with the liquid, and we can blend with different ages. But I mean, the ages are a function. So the actual wood policy in distilleries is going to be very critical.
Yeah. Mark, going back to your distillery setting up in Mayo, so obviously the planning for that distillery is a long time in the works, and I know it's Paul Davies and his wife Jude are working with you there on that. When are you due to open, and have you been delayed because of COVID?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we were due to open this year for the third time, I think. So the dates. Now the distillery is actually fully built now at this stage down in Mayo, and all of the equipment, including our nice 3 shiny pot stills, are sitting just behind the nice glass window, looking at us. So all the fermentation and the milling and the spirit tanks and the casking, everything's in place. But we've the last yards to go on getting it into production. So At about the beginning of March this year, we thought we'd have some Northern Italians over from the still makers pretty soon, and then we heard the word lockdown for the first time. We thought it applied to people on the other side of the world more than us, so it's hard to believe it's December already. We haven't finished those final yards, so the new start date is now 2021. Get those last works finished and switch the big switch on then. And,
well, look, we'll be really looking forward to coming down and visiting.
Go to the opening. You better invite us, Mark.
Oh, I will, of course. Yeah, and hopefully that one won't be virtual now.
No, we need a real opening. There's only so much we can do on Zoom and all the rest. So,
and you probably haven't missed much by not being going in 2021.
No, probably not.
So this is a lost year for us.
It's probably more frustrating for ourselves than anything, but probably when we look back on it, and this has happened to us a couple of times, where something didn't happen as planned and it kind of turned out for the better maybe afterwards, so it's hard to have that perspective at the time, but we might count ourselves lucky that we didn't open in March, April this year. That might have been a disaster, so we've weathered the year pretty well. We've been busy all year on the cooperage, and with the new product release, even though it's a very small kind of limited kind of product release, it was a lovely way to end the year for ourselves, because it gave you a kind of a focus and a completion of this and a toast to John, so it was a nice way to end the year and then kick into 2021 of back to work, getting the distillery finished off.
Yeah. Listen, I wish you well. I'm sure the last few bottles will disappear. I hope that the new releases will reflect John as well going forward, and hopefully we have a nice, safe, and quick return back to normality. Although, John, you worried me there where you said a couple of years to return back to normality.
I kind of think from the viewpoint of those of us, 2021 is gone. Because remember, if you want tourists and things like that, they book a long time in advance. So it'll be 2022 before you see it. And that assumes things get booked. But, it's a short time in the history, and it's a very short time in whiskey.
Yeah.
It'll be, I know that those of you who have visitor centres, Jack and Stephen are hurting badly, bleeding blood, because, from 135,000 down to I was in there today, and they had 2 tours of 4, 1 an hour, 8. It was horrible actually. It had been worse when they'd nobody, but there's a way to go. But it will be fine. Listen here,
John, that's okay, because when I went into the distillery last week, and there was no competition for those sausage rolls that they have in there, so that was my concern.
I don't like them. My wife liked them. They like sausage. I don't like them. They give me indigestion.
Deirdre has great taste. Perhaps we might just end up and maybe Mark or John, you might want to give us your final memories or memories of John and how you remember him.
Well, as I said to you, and in fact, I'm delighted with that, because Lisa, I'd like you to tell your mom that she had to be a great woman. I mean, John is a larger than life figure, and I'm sure she didn't know what was going on half of the time. But it stuck together, and Kilbeggan worked out really well for him. He was very important to us. He was never boring. That's a certainty. Anytime that you were there, as I say, Brian Quimby go looking for him. And he helped us greatly. And he stuck with us when we had some awful dark times in the early 90s. When we had to put people on very short time. And then when we had to stop distilling for a couple of years, he plowed on with us. So I think he has contributed greatly. And what he's been doing in Nephin for the last 3 or 4 years was obviously very important, in that the variation of the wood, as I talked about. So this is a worthy tribute to him, and he will be remembered.
Yeah, that's nice. It's a nice tribute, John. Thank you very much. And then Mark, of course, you would have worked with him most recently.
Yeah. And John was a pleasure to sort of go into work with, because as well as getting through we were kind of, you know, starting out with one barrel and a set of tools and starting from there, you know. The shed was as cold as the shed he used to be in, John. He didn't upgrade conditions too much, actually.
Yeah.
You know, John at the stage that we knew him, you know, he was a master of his craft, you know, hugely experienced in the industry, but, you know, still, you know, in a cold shed with his own set of tools, and that's where we started. And he was a pleasure to go to work with, because he didn't let that stop him from, you know, working with us to do what we needed to do. You know, his focus was always on training the two Leonards, you know, who we sent down to him, and you know, his interest was in getting their skill set and helping them in the craft. You know, it was never about John. Like, John was a load of crack, but didn't, you know, it was never about John. It was about the people he was helping around him, you know, a lot. And so it's lovely to hear kind of it's a similar experience from John Teeling, you know, in those days. Like, he really stuck with us through those days as we were making that up and starting. So, you know, over the time, I suppose I remember John as a friend. Then more than anything, you know, he would have known my wife well, and you know, some lovely photos. My wife does the photography and all the photography and the video that you just showed there. So I spent a lot of time with John, you know, and also got to ask him questions that we wouldn't have, you know, kind of considered maybe asking him in normal kind of work conversation, you know. So a lot of the great kind of stories and quotes came from that. Yeah. And so I suppose that's how we'll remember John, really, as you know, the founder of Nephin Cooperage. You know, the link in that generational link that will continue with Darren and Ian, and hopefully onwards. And then, you know, primarily more than anything, just as a lovely person to be around.
Yeah, and then Darren has a lovely discussion, great memories and words of John, a true gentleman, and he's greatly missed. And he owes him so much personally. So look, you know, that's a lovely legacy to leave. You know, we're not here forever, and to leave something so positive is lovely. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I wish you every success going forward. I'm looking forward to the distillery opening, and I hope you have a lovely Christmas. And we'll speak in the new year in better days. So Sláinte, and to the memory of John.
Thank you very much. And Lisa, please remember me to your mother, please. Thank you. Good luck, fellas.
Thank you very much, guys. Happy
guys.
Christmas, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Very touching. And if you can support it all by purchasing one of the Cooper Commemorative Editions, as I said, available from James Fox in Dublin, and also any subscriptions that are bought between today and tomorrow, the proceeds will also go. So thank you very much. Stay safe. We've an exciting show on Wednesday coming up, the last one before Christmas, and we'll let you know about the details on that in the meantime. In the meantime, thank you very much.